Welcome, everybody. My name is Jessica Bailiff. Thanks for those that came here in person. Thanks for those joining us online. Just a couple of housekeeping things to go over. For those joining us in person, if you hear please silence or vibrate your cell phone right now, would be awesome. We are not providing legal advice. This is an informational session. We're going to provide some resources and places to go if you're ready to come through that next step of the process. We are going to have about 15 minutes at the end for questions, both in the room and online. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can. And the library does close at 7 o'clock. You might hear a really loud bell. As it gets close to there, you might not. But we will stick to time and have everybody finish at 7. So I'm going to turn it over to our virtual presenters. Deb Gross.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jessica. So I'm Debbie Gross. I'm the CEO of Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts. And I just want to first thank Jessica for our partnership with the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, as well as the Allegheny County Law Library. We have had a tremendously successful, I will say, series of programs in 2022. And we have scheduled out a number of programs for 2023. That is weird to say. So stay tuned. As Jessica said, we are not providing legal advice. We are giving you information. The slides will be sent to you by PDF afterwards. And, hopefully this will enable you to be able to figure this out on your own. I am really excited that we have Matt Olish here to help us with this PowerPoint presentation. I've known Matt for many years, and he when he was a young lawyer, right? He led the Philadelphia Bar Association's Young Lawyers Charge to expunge records. It was an amazing clinic. There were over 500 records that were expunged, and Matt, while is now at a big law firm in Philadelphia, still stays involved in the pro bono world and the expungement of records world. So I just want to say thank you, Matt, because I truly appreciate your time, and we're going to start with the slides. So a little bit about this is for Carnegie Library. Also want to emphasize, you should get a library card. It is free, and there are a lot of resources that you can use through the card. Is that okay, Jess? Okay, this is for the Allegheny County Law Library. They have been a tremendous partnership. They are located in downtown Pittsburgh and are always an available resource for you. A little bit about PMC. We have been in existence for over 30 years, fighting for fair courts, access to the courts, and I want everybody to keep in mind that 2023 is an election year, so you will be hearing from us again about the candidates for running for judicial positions and what courts and positions they are running for. So stay tuned. And this is what we do. We do education about the judiciary, about election forms, about the media in the courts, and we advocate on behalf of the judiciary or judicial reforms as well. We also have in Pittsburgh, and if in case anybody is interested, please let us know, a bail arraignment observation program, and we are looking for volunteers who are interested in going to municipal court to observe bail arraignments. So tonight, these are our programs that are coming up. We do have another expungement of records and clean slate program. It is going to be very similar to this one. So if you for some reason have questions after this one, feel free to join us by signing up on pmconline.org. And this is our agenda tonight, and I'm going to pass this to Matt Olish. And Matt, thank you again.
Thanks so much, Debbie. I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this and to speak to everyone about expungements and sealing and limited access. As Debbie mentioned, I've been fortunate to be involved in this work in the past and try to continue to be involved in it in my career, even though I'm a civil litigator. And this is mostly on the criminal side. It's just so important that lawyers are involved in helping folks not have their past criminal record live with them for their entire lives. And that's why this process, and that's why our laws are so important, because it allows for a second chance. It allows for people to not, who have already paid their debt, to not have mistakes follow them around. And we're really fortunate in Pennsylvania that we have some great legislators who have put into and made laws some great policy that makes this a lot easier for everyone. But I'll get to that. So as you see on the screen, and I think I probably should have gone through the agenda, but we're going to talk about the Clean Slate Act. We're going to talk about expungements, and we'll talk about sealing of records. And we'll try to leave as much time as we can at the end of the presentation for Q&A. As Debbie mentioned, we're not giving legal advice, and we're not here to do petitions for you tonight, but everyone will have access to the presentation, and you'll hopefully be able to use it to either prepare petitions on your own, or there are resources available statewide, certainly in Allegheny County, that can help with this. So, and in case, I don't know if it was mentioned, but I'm physically in Philadelphia. So why is this so important? As I mentioned, people make mistakes, and that happens, but we have a criminal justice system that allows people to serve out whatever punishment was handed down. And once that happens, people shouldn't have to pay for those mistakes the rest of their lives. People should have the ability to get jobs, get housing without these past criminal records following them around. We really think it's important that this process is in place. And the system that we have only works if people can be rehabilitated, and that means providing for second chances. And so we want to level that playing field for job opportunities, increase access to education and housing. So,
I was gonna say, and there are many, jobs that you don't realize you need to have a clean, a clear record for. For example, nursing, right? So, this really is important in your job search.
Yep, absolutely. And we'll talk later about the different types of background checks that can be used for jobs and what might be accessible to certain types of searches. So the Clean Slate law, we'll start with this just because it was so recent and so important, and really can impact a lot of people without maybe them not even knowing about it. But this was passed in 2019 by the Pennsylvania legislature, and it expanded the expungement laws in Pennsylvania to provide for automatic sealing of certain offenses under certain circumstances after a certain amount of time has passed without a conviction. I'll just note here again, and we'll talk about it in more detail later on, but there is a difference between expungement and sealing, otherwise known as limited access. But sealing is where the general public is not able to access a criminal record, but certain government agencies and under very limited circumstances, other people can. Expungement is where a record is basically wiped from a certain charge, or a conviction or something is wiped from your criminal record. It's expunged. It's no longer there for all intents and purposes. Anyway, so the Clean Slate law that was passed only deals with sealing, with limited access, and it provided for certain offenses and convictions to be automatically sealed, which impacted hundreds, thousands of people, maybe without them even knowing it. But included in this were offenses that were charged without a conviction. So if you weren't convicted for something and the charges were dropped, or under other circumstances, it should have been automatically sealed. Summary convictions after 10 years have passed. And significantly, and for the first time really, many misdemeanors, second and third degree misdemeanors, were covered by this Clean Slate law and were automatically sealed, as well as some ungraded offenses punishable by 2 years or less in prison. Convictions must have been at least 10 years old, and you must be conviction free for 10 years to have the Clean Slate law apply to your criminal records. Certain individuals were not eligible based on their criminal history. People convicted of felonies or certain violent first-degree misdemeanors were not eligible, as were individuals with 4 or more second-degree misdemeanors or higher. Similarly, there are certain charges that regardless of how they're classified, misdemeanor, they would not be eligible for clean slate. These include any offenses involving danger to a person, against a family member, crimes involving firearms and other dangerous articles, sexual offenses, cruelty to animals, and corruption of minors were all not eligible to be sealed under the clean slate law. And
Oops, sorry. Nope, nope, there, sorry.
that's okay. So that's just a quick overview on the clean slate law. We will talk more about it later on, but it was a really important step that the Commonwealth took to give people a second chance. And there were other certain individuals, again, as we talked about, other crimes and things that were not eligible for clean slate that we'll go over, but it's something that you need to be aware of and check if there was an offense on your record that might have automatically been covered by this. So moving on to expungement. What is expungement? As we talked about, expungement, different from sealing, is the process to completely remove a criminal charge or conviction from a person's record. An expungement order directs the court to treat a conviction as it had never occurred. It's wiped from your record. Importantly, and as we will discuss, not all charges and convictions are subject to expungement. We'll talk about the circumstances when you can get expungement, and it's typically a process that occurs in the state courts. So while clean slate, which we were just talking about, is an automatic provision of limited access for certain charges, expungement is a separate process that will wipe certain charges and convictions from your record, but it doesn't happen automatically. You have to go through a process, and we'll talk about that process to obtain that. They're governed in Pennsylvania by Title 18, Section 9122. And there are certain circumstances where expungements are available. If someone reaches 70 years of age while remaining arrest-free and prosecution-free for 10 years, I think this slide might have, it erroneously states following a summary conviction, and I don't believe that's accurate, and we'll fix it on any slide deck that's disseminated. But if you reach 70 years and you're arrest and prosecution free for 10 years proceeding, then you're available to petition any charge for expungement. For summary convictions, you have to have been arrest-free and prosecution-free for 5 years following the conviction. And after that period of time, you can petition for expungement. Usually summary convictions are minor criminal offenses, disorderly conduct, harassment. Oftentimes they just result in a fine without any sort of jail time or anything beyond a fine. If you're charged and never convicted, if the charges are withdrawn, null pros, dismissed, or not, or you were found not guilty, those charges will remain on your criminal record. They indicate the result, but you can then go through the expungement process. If you don't even want them to be there, you can petition to have them removed, as long as there was no conviction. And then if there's a diversion program that you've completed, and for some reason that charge remains on your record, you can petition to have that expunged as well. And we'll talk more about diversionary programs later on. So those are certain circumstances. What crimes can be expunged? Any crime if you were arrested but not convicted, if 18 months have passed since the arrest and there's been no other criminal proceedings. So there has to have been no other criminal proceedings happening and a certain amount of time has to have passed. If you were between 18 and 21 when convicted of certain underage drinking offenses, you can petition for expungement once you turn 21, as long as all of your sentencing conditions were met. And that's a recurring theme that you'll see, especially when it comes to payment of fines and other fees. Conditions of your sentence need to have been met if you were convicted of something that's eligible for expungement to get it expunged. As we mentioned, summary offenses after 5 years. And if there was ARD, as we just mentioned, if there's an accelerated rehabilitative disposition program for a crime that was not related to a sex crime against a minor. There are numerous types of expungement, and we'll talk about them and the differences between them. A full expungement, a partial expungement, limited access, which we've mentioned already, otherwise known as sealing. There's summary charges, and then for some ARD diversionary programs, the expungement can be automatic as well, and we'll talk about that. So a full expungement, as we discussed, that's when a record is fully cleared and wiped clean. And that's charges that are disposed of as not guilty, withdrawn, dismissed, or not prosecuted. And all of the charges in a case must meet this requirement. So basically, if you were brought up on charges and were not convicted of anything, you can go for a full expungement and try to get the whole thing off of your record. Conversely, partial expungement is just that. It's an expungement of part of a criminal record. And it applies where there are charges that you were convicted of something, but others may have been dismissed. Perhaps there was a plea deal and there were some other things that were dismissed as part of that. And a partial expungement, you would seek to have the charges that did not result in a conviction expunged, but the conviction would remain. And as we've discussed and will continue to discuss, there may be other circumstances where you can get the conviction expunged depending on the charge and the severity and the crime and things like that. But initially speaking, the partial expungement would just be for those charges where there was no conviction. A limited access expungement, sometimes just called limited access, sometimes just called sealing. As we've discussed, it limits access. It's a circumstance where it removes certain records from public access, but others in a much more limited setting will have access to arrest and court records, such as law enforcement, state licensing agencies, and things like that. Again, it's available for second and third degree misdemeanors that carry a maximum penalty of no more than 2 years imprisonment. And there is a time period, as we've discussed. After completing all sentencing, you must wait 10 years to be eligible, and there must not be any arrest or prosecution for another crime during the 10-year waiting period. I just saw a comment about sound. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Is it good? Debbie, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can
Just
hear
that
you.
one
I'm
person.
fine. I don't.
Okay, great. Just making
Keep
sure.
on going. You're doing great. Thank you.
Okay, just checking. Summary charges, as we've discussed, summary charges are certain types of lower level charges, including non-traffic citations, disorderly conduct, loitering, harassment, some lower level theft, shoplifting, etc. That usually results in a fine. These can be expunged. They can be expunged completely, not just sealed. And to be expunged, there has to be no arrest, charges, or convictions 5 years from the conviction date. And that's for summary offenses. And then accelerated rehabilitative disposition, or ARD, is a type of diversionary program. Typically what will happen here is it'll be offered after you've been charged with something that is not very major, usually, and as you see, for first-time nonviolent offenders, it's not a conviction, it's not a dismissal, but there ultimately will be no arrest record, and you're waiving your rights to a speedy trial as part of it. Basically, the DA will postpone the prosecution of your case during the ARD program. It gets offered to you as part of a resolution for the crime, and it's a period of time where you need to, it's basically it's sort of like probation. You need to remain arrest free. It's not a conviction. It's not an acquittal. But the record will reflect through the PA State Police as unreported. But that's the disposition. It'll still be there. But after the completion of the time period, the ARD program, it basically automatically should expunge it from your record. Typically, they'll take about 9 to 12 months as long as you pay all your fines and costs. And so the key is to make sure whatever the terms are, and there's really no catch-all, it just depending on what the judge and the parties will agree, there'll be terms and conditions that you have to comply with. And at the end of the completion of the program, it goes away as if it has not happened in the first place. So what is the process for this? How do you get started? What should you do? The first thing is to get a copy of your criminal record to determine whether you have charges that are eligible and see what you can do about them. Some of them may have been sealed automatically by the clean slate law. Some of them should have been, and maybe they weren't, and you can figure out the way to make sure that they are, and then you can see what's eligible for expungement or limited access, and then if needed, file a petition. So the first step is checking, do I have a criminal record? Hopefully you know, but you may not know. And if you don't, there are resources available to you to find out. And these resources are here listed. The websites, again, everyone, I believe, will get a copy of this so you can have the websites available. And there are instructions here for what you do. You go to this website, you go to the criminal court of common pleas section and you search by participant name, put in your name, and it should be able to tell you if any records for you come up. There's also a link here for a website where it can give you pictures that kind of guide you through step-by-step the process.
And I just want to interrupt for a moment because it's
Yeah.
important for you to get every single criminal record you have. Don't just stop at the first one. There could be a criminal record in different magisterial district courts, in different courts of common pleas. So just make sure you do a thorough search.
Yes, that's exactly right. Because each criminal charge, each conviction needs to be dealt with separately. Similarly, there could be separate records in different counties. You need to make sure you're getting a comprehensive picture of all of your criminal records. That's exactly right. There are background checks available from the Pennsylvania Police, the state police, for $20. There is the website here where you can go and request a background check. You should also contact the county court where you think you might have had a proceeding or any sort of record to determine if an individual access and review is needed. Many courts are requiring these to get expungement. So you should contact the court to ask about this individual access and review process. Once you have the records, check if you owe outstanding fines and costs from any convictions. This is an important point because often fines, costs, and restitution can stand in the way and will preclude sealing or expungement from being available. And in the Clean Slate Act, for example, your records wouldn't be automatically sealed if there are outstanding amounts owed potentially. So you need to go to this website. It looks like it's being put in the chat. It's here as well. And determine if you owe money and pay the money, or talk about getting into a payment plan, or potentially a fee waiver. These are all options, but the key is that these all need to be dealt with in order to be eligible for the things that we're talking about here. And then the next step, if you need to, if there are charges that were not automatically, charges or convictions that were not automatically sealed and maybe eligible for expungement, you need to prepare and file a petition to get them expunged. So what does that look like? The process is you get the petition together and you have to file it with the Court of Common Pleas where the charge was brought. You'll be filing it under the docket of that criminal charge. You need a separate petition for each arrest. There are oftentimes fees involved in the process, dependent on the county. Obviously, state, we're all here in Pennsylvania, but the county fee requirements can vary. Once you prepare the petition, and we'll talk about what that looks like in a moment, you file it and you go before a judge to consider the matter and your request. What will happen is the local district attorney's office will be provided with notice of your petition and given the chance to object to your request for expungement. It's hard to say, you know, depending on where you are, whether a DA will object or not, but if they don't object, it is typically granted by the court. Can't guarantee that, but typically if the DA's office doesn't object, the court will look at it and put it through. If the DA does object, there'll be a hearing on the matter to determine why there is an objection. And perhaps there are certain circumstances unique to your case that are causing the DA to object. It needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, depending on where you are, depending on the tendencies of the DA's office. But there'll be a hearing where you'll have an opportunity to impress upon the court why it's very important that you get this that you're asking for, and the DA will have the opportunity to flesh out why they are objecting. If the petition is granted, it'll go to the appropriate state agencies who will take action to either expunge the record or limit access to the certain people who can obtain access under the sealing process. It says here the process can take up to 9 months. That's kind of just a ballpark. It'll depend probably county to county. It'll depend on the judge involved. It'll depend on the judge's backlog of cases potentially. So a rough estimate, 9 months, that maybe it can be quicker, maybe it could take longer, but that's kind of a just general estimate of time. There are forms available for you to use to prepare your petition. As you'll see, there are websites here where the forms are available. There are summary charges available to be expunged on one form, and then you have a different form for other types of expungements. So make sure you're using the right form, of course. I believe the next slide is, this is kind of an example of what this looks like. It's the summary expungement one, but this is an example of what these petitions, the form petitions, will look like. You could also retain the services of an attorney, or there are legal service organizations who could prepare their petition for you potentially. But if you're going to do it yourself, these forms are available. And as you'll see, you'll need to have all this information about your charges. You need the docket numbers, you need to put in all your personal information, name, address, etc. And then you need all the case information about your underlying charges, where you were arrested, the charges, basically all the information that the courts need to make the decision on the expungement. You need to give your reasons for the expungement, which typically they're pretty commonplace reasons, but if you have any particular circumstances to you, you'll definitely want to let the court know. Certainly the more personal you can make your petition and give the court insight into your life and how meaningful and impactful this will be for you, the better it can be, and the better likelihood that you'll succeed on the petition. You need to make sure that you're attaching a copy of your criminal history. There's a checkbox here for that. If you don't attach it, you have to explain why. And you'll note that you have to obtain the history within the 60 days before filing the petition, because they want to make sure that it's current. And then you are signing the petition, you are verifying and basically swearing under penalty of perjury that everything in the petition is true and accurate. So you have to do everything possible to make sure that everything you are putting in there is true and accurate, and it would be something basically the equivalent of your sworn testimony. You also need to include a form order for the court, which is basically the order that you are asking the court to enter if they grant your petition. And you'll see there's on the websites that we had linked to, there are form of orders for you to use. And you'll see it here on the left. You may need a cover sheet. I mean, you need to check with each court where you need to file to determine the local procedures and whatever requirements of paperwork or otherwise there are. Again, there are legal service organizations who can assist with this, but you may need a cover sheet. You need to attach the criminal records, the case disposition, the dockets, the filing fee, and that should be generally the universe, but again, you need to check on a court by court basis. You can call the Allegheny Court Records Office, and there's the phone number to get information and make sure. It's important to make sure that you have everything required before you file. It's not gonna, I think courts are pretty good about letting people know if they are missing things, but it's just going to slow down the process. If you're missing things, you need to go and resubmit it. And, so it's best to do all that legwork before you submit it for filing. As I mentioned, you're signing the original, make copies, 3 copies for the court. You should be keeping a copy for yourself and keep those records because as we mentioned, it can be a long process. It can be a long period of time. You want to make sure you have that record with you of what you're submitting to the court for your reference during the process. You can hand deliver it. There's an address here where you can walk in and file it in person. You can also send it by mail. I'm not sure how reliable the mail is anymore, but maybe send it certified. But there's the address there as well. So we talked, I think we already covered this, expungement versus sealing. Sealing, again, just to reiterate, if you seal something, there are still people who can access it, not the general public, but some people. So who can't see a sealed record? Can't be seen by the general public, or by landlords, schools, licensing boards for occupations, and most employers, employers who don't use FBI background checks. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And which means that the vast majority of employers, because most people don't do that because I think it costs a good deal more. The vast majority of them won't see a sealed record. But I wouldn't just assume that, as we'll talk about. So who can see a sealed record? Let's make sure we know the universe of people. Sealed records can be accessed by law enforcement. If you want to own a gun and use a gun, when you submit an application, including applications for a permit to carry, Act 235, those sealed records can be accessed for those purposes. Immigration purposes, if you have a criminal record and there's an immigration application, it will be accessed for that purpose. International travel, other court cases, sometimes if there's custody, notably protection from abuse, PFA matters, your criminal record may be available for those. If you want to become a lawyer, your criminal record will be available for the state bar to consider. There are limited situations where some governmental agency or some contractor or someone who works with the government, the federal law could require a background check for employment, in which case, under those circumstances, they would use the FBI background check, and that would show the record, even though it has been sealed. The FBI records, again, will show the sealed cases, but they can only be considered when required by federal law. Again, most employers are not allowed to get your FBI record and don't use the FBI background checks. But you should check whether your record can be expunged if your job does require an FBI background check, because if it's expunged, it won't show up because it's been expunged versus limited access and sealing where it remains on your record. And it, as noted here, if you're asked to provide fingerprints, it's a good signal that that's an FBI background check because the fingerprints are required. So we talked about expungement. To get the record sealed, there are options. Again, we have the clean slate automatic sealing. It may have been sealed already without you doing anything. But similar to expungements, you can also get certain things sealed, which may not be eligible for expungement, but they may be eligible for sealing. For example, it says here, misdemeanor 2 simple assault. It can't be expunged, but you can get it sealed, and you have to go through a petition process for that as well. Frequently asked question, can people access their own court documents after a record is sealed under clean slate? And the answer is yes. The sealed files are not available to the public, but individuals, you can still request your own court records if something has been sealed. You can go to the courthouse in the county where the case was brought, and you can get those records. So you can still use case information from FBI or other background checks that have sealed information to identify and request official court records that may be required for immigration purposes. So again, you can request this information to see what has been sealed for you. In contrast, again, expungement, the documents are destroyed, the records are gone, it's expunged from your record. And this is really useful, again, for the immigration process if you need it. And there's a link here that gives information about the immigration process and how clean slate specifically has impacted immigration.
And this website, My Clean Slate PA, is an excellent resource. It has forms. It helps. It gives you very detailed explanation of how to fill out the forms.
Yeah, they're really, I mean, this program is helpful, but there's so much information and resources out there, and we'll talk about that momentarily too. There's really a lot available for you to help make this process as easy as possible, really. So similar processes that are available. We talked about ARD. It's basically a probation sentence without a conviction. You serve your probation and ARD, whatever the terms and conditions are, and it's not on your record. And so it's used for sometimes first-time DUI offenses, and it's really just meant to be another avenue where you don't have to have one minor mistake live with you forever. There's Section 17, which is a very similar diversionary program. Oftentimes can be used for minor marijuana offenses. And then there's the pardon process, and we should talk about the pardon process as well, because that is another avenue you can use to get something off of your criminal record. You are basically asking for a pardon. You're asking for forgiveness. I think anyone following the news, it's been all over the news in recent years. It's only can be granted by the governor, although the way the process works is that it goes to an application will be submitted to the Board of Pardons, which is typically chaired by the Lieutenant Governor in Pennsylvania, and they make a recommendation to the governor as to who is really worthy of a pardon. They take it on a case-by-case basis, and it's a much more fluid process. I mean, there's requirements, and we're not going to go through the entire pardon process here, but there's a lot of requirements that you need to follow, but ultimately you're telling your story to this board and to say why something shouldn't live with you for going forward. It's an extremely lengthy process. There's a huge backlog. I think soon Senator-elect Fetterman did a really good job of trying to get through that backlog and try to, really prioritize the pardon process, but there's so many applications they get, and it could be a really, really long time before you actually get before that board and get a decision on your applications. But when there are charges that are not eligible for expungement or sealing at all, it may be the only way you can go and the only option. So it's something worth considering as well. The key point, which we've talked about previously, and it is really worth emphasizing again, you need to make sure you are current on any fines owed, fees, and restitution, because not having those items current can prevent the process from moving forward. For example, under the clean slate law, it's automatic, but it's only automatic if you've paid all your court-ordered financial obligations. So it's a great thing that can happen, but you need to make sure you're doing your part in making sure that's all taken care of. And for sealing, it's recommended to pay your restitution first, because your case can be eligible for sealing in some circumstances once the restitution is paid, along with potentially other fees. Even if there may be instances there where the sealing can be provided even if other court fees are not paid, but the restitution must be paid. And you can always ask the judge for permission to pay that restitution, even if you owe other court fees. And again, the My Clean Slate PA website has a section on fees, which has a good explainer on all that. Resources, there are really great resources available out there. There are a lot of great organizations who focus on this work. You could potentially be connected with a pro bono attorney, maybe. There's no guarantees with anything, but these organizations all really try to help as many people as possible. So, it's worth considering any or all of them if you need assistance with the process. Some may be able to just assist you and guide you through the process and if you do it on your own. Others may be able to provide pro bono attorneys in certain circumstances. And there are other resources. So you have community legal services, the Pittsburgh Pro Bono Partnership, the Pittsburgh Pardon Hub, the Allegheny County Bar Foundation, all great organizations that help. There are also all these online resources that are provided here that will have other materials which talk about everything we talked about in this presentation and beyond. There's a lot, we haven't covered. We haven't gone through every single offense or every possibility, nor do I think we have the ability to do that, but these resources are all available for you. And
it's just to show that there is a clinic coming up on March 1st, which is a little ways away, but that there is a place to go if downtown, but you need to read, through the Carnegie Library, where there will be an expungement and job fair. Okay, but okay, so we are up to questions, and we do have a lot in that. I don't know if you've. So I'll say one of the questions is that if the individual was charged with a crime, possession with intent 30 years ago, and that was the first and only offense, is that able to be expunged?
It really depends on how it's classified. I mean, I don't know, and I have, I admittedly don't have the criminal code memorized to know what would be potentially misdemeanor or felony, and it really also depends on the sentence, because
as well as the individual's age.
Absolutely correct.
So
a lot of this needs to be, and I think the answer to a lot of questions about individual charges is that it needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. And that's why it's really important to get your record and go through it carefully, and potentially even go through it with a pro bono attorney if one's available to you, because then they can take a look and say, okay, this might be eligible, this might not be eligible. So that is, I think, going to be a lot of the answers. Same thing, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a question about whether there are still fines due. You know, can a certain charge be expunged? The fines, costs, and restitutions do need to be paid. There are ways to get fines and costs waived, you know, but there are certain financial requirements, you know, earning requirements, and there are forms and questions that need to be answered.
I think I saw a question, can felonies be expunged? And the answer is really typically no, but it will depend on circumstances. For example, if you're 70 or older, that might be a possibility. I know that that's kind of the next step for the state legislators who passed clean slate, that they want to move on next to potential some felonies and seeing if we can expand the processes available for those. But I think clean slate was really the first time where certain misdemeanors were really swept into this process. So felonies are hopefully next on there.
Okay, there's also a question about whether a theft charge would have to wait 5 years to be expunged, but again, we need a little more information, so it's hard to answer that.
Yeah, if it was a summary offense, yes.
Does Jessica have any in person that she wants to
Yes.
address?
Yeah.
Okay,
thank you.
great.
Okay, I think let's start over here. We'll kind of work our way over.
But Jessica, just repeat the question.
I
so
will,
that-
yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I want to know on each record that you're trying to expunge, do they be on the same process of petition? So
for each record that you're trying to expunge, do they need to be, can they be together as part of one process? Or do they have to be sort of like separate for expungement?
If they were all charged together, you can submit a petition for it all together. But then if there's a separate docket for something else, you need to file under each docket, typically.
Is there a fee for this?
Yes, there is a fee, a filing fee for the petition. There's a filing fee to get the criminal record. I mean, there are fees there. If there are ways to, I believe, waive this if you're in form of paupers, meaning you don't have the financial means and wherewithal. Also, there are, as Matt said, pro bono firms and like there are website job fairs that will actually also help you with this process, because employees are needed. So some employers are willing to help with this process.
Next question. Yes.
So,
Oh, sure.
so I did everything that you was talking about in that form.
Mhm.
My pro bono attorney, and she can't find that process on the paperwork. Or what I'm looking for, the expunge in the forms was requesting for a criminal record check.
Okay.
But the information that I have on there is not showing up that I'm looking for. But when I went for a job placement, they showed that on their fingerprint.
Okay.
This process happened over 30 years ago in my life,
Mhm.
and I'm still dealing with the situation now.
Okay. So this person is working with a pro bono lawyer, going through everything that you're describing. The lawyer isn't able to find this particular record, but then when he does the fingerprints, it's still coming up. So do you have any advice or solutions for if someone just isn't able to even find the record?
So it sounds like there's a possibility it could even be a federal record as opposed to a state record, maybe? I don't know.
Could be a federal record is the question.
I don't know what happened.
Okay. So maybe that could be maybe a question to go back to the pro bono lawyer with, and that could be maybe where the disconnect would be coming from.
And another option besides the court system filings for criminal records is to go to the police records. Sometimes they should be the same, but you know, you never know.
Should I put out time for that? What else?
Yes, yeah, I think going downtown to the Allegheny County Courthouse would be recommended to help with that process, yes?
Is there a fee that I can pay or anything for that? You get that paid for?
That I'm unsure if there would
What-
be it's a fee to go to the courthouse to ask about police records separate from the court records.
The clerk's office is always, and records office are open. There would be a fee to obtain the records, but not to ask a question. Well, Jess, you silenced yourself.
Okay, sorry, we had an announcement going, if you could just repeat that one more time. You didn't hear me?
No, Deb.
I'm sorry, say that. Now you're muted again.
We
The
can-
bottom one is on.
we had an announcement going.
Okay.
Okay. Repeat what you said one more time, please. No?
Deb, please repeat what you said.
Repeat one more time, Deb.
Okay, so the clerk's office is always open. You can always go in there and ask questions and ask for help. The fee is to obtain a record, a copy of a record.
So you could at least go find information, should not be charged a fee. If they actually find the record, then that would be when the fee comes into play.
Thank you.
Other questions in the room? Yes, okay.
ARP that you.
So for first-time DUI offenses, how does the ARD work for that? The expungement work for that?
Typically with ARD, it would happen at the end of your completion of the program. It should be taken off. The whole point of the ARD program is that it's another sort of automatic mechanism. So you should be checking your record when you've completed all the conditions of the program, including the payment of any fees or fines or anything imposed as part of that, restitution or otherwise. And then once all the conditions are met, it should be like it didn't happen on your record. But if it remains there, it's something you need to look at and determine if action needs to be taken.
Any other questions in the room? Okay, I think we're good on in-person questions. If there's any more.
Okay, let me go back and look online.
Okay,
Wow.
there's a question about what's eligible for a pardon. Anything's eligible for a pardon. There's no limitation on what's eligible. Obviously, severe violent crimes are unlikely to be pardoned, but that depends on the circumstance. But there's no limitation on what you can apply for a pardon. Something where there's a question about not knowing if something constitutes a misdemeanor. I mean, you need to go through your record. If you need to work with an attorney, contact the resources we've been referencing and that are in the presentation, and you can get help determining what was a misdemeanor. I think the best place to obtain the full background records, I think that information was in the presentation. In terms of, if you're talking about full background, full criminal records, we covered how to obtain those.
There's a question, it's a little confusing, but it's about being in front of a magistrate in a different county. You need to file the petition in each location, right, where the record is. So if it's a magistrate in 2 different counties, because there's 2 different charges in different counties, you need to file them in those different counties for each charge.
Yeah, it's really determine where all the records are and file wherever they are. That's right.
Okay. I know there's somebody who only has 5 minutes left on the information. If you need the if you want a PDF copy, make sure you reach out to, Carnegie or to PMC, and we can always send you a hard copy of this program. Okay.
You will also be able to find this program on pmconline.org early next week.
Okay. All right.
Right, yes, as well as Allegheny County Law Library. And then we
Yes.
also have a playlist for Civic CLP on YouTube. So we'll make sure to send a follow-up email to everyone that registered with the slides, the recording, and any additional resources that maybe we forgot to throw into the slides. But you can always reach back out if you have any follow-up questions that we can try to point you to those resources.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning
Thank
in.
you.
We're gonna say goodbye before the final bell rings.
Right.
Again.
I feel like I'm in a classroom.
Yes.
All right, well,